Candy Season 1, Episode 1, Friday the 13th. To kick this one off, we meet everyday church-going wife Candy Montgomery, who is practicing a speech in front of her husband Pat Montgomery that she is going to do in front of a children's sermon the following day. The following morning, we meet Betty Gore, who is another housewife in Wiley, Texas, who has a baby of her own with her husband Alan Gore. Alan is set to go out of town, and Betty doesn't want him to go, but he insists he must for work. Basically, we are setting up the story that these two families are pretty similar and live similar lifestyles. Their daughters are actually best friends too and hang out with each other quite often. Betty's daughter, Christina, is at the Montgomery household staying the night with their daughter Becky. The Montgomery family is planning to go see the new Star Wars movie later in the day and then go swimming afterwards. Candy calls Betty and asks what a good time would be to come over and grab Christina's swimsuit, and Betty says noon. Candy takes the kids to Bible school and then heads over to the Gore household to grab the swimsuit. The next thing we see is Candy speeding home with her hair wet and a gash in her head. She showers and hurries to clean all of her clothes. Candy then goes back to the church to try and go on with her day as normal. Candy calls Pat and says that Christina will be staying at their house one more night at the request of Betty. Meanwhile, Alan is still out of town and keeps trying to call to get in touch with Betty, but has no luck. At their home, Sherry, Candy's best friend, can tell something is up with Candy, but Candy says she is fine. Throughout the rest of the day, Candy is nauseous and not being herself. Later that night, Alan calls Candy and asks if she talked to Betty earlier in the day, and Candy says she stopped by, but everything was fine when she left. It's important to note that Candy and Alan had an affair that lasted for 10 months, but they stopped seeing each other 8 months ago. Next person Alan calls is one of his neighbors, asking to go check on Betty, and he's starting to get really worried. The neighbors get inside and find the baby unattended and Betty's dead body near the laundry room. They then break the news to Alan, who does the same to Candy, and Candy acts surprised. Episode 2, Happy Wife, Happy Life. This episode begins with a flashback to 2 years prior, where Betty was a teacher, but didn't really get along with her students very well, and she was let go from her job. With Betty unemployed, she tells Alan she wants to foster another child since she will be home more. At the Montgomery house, Candy starts to feel disconnected from Pat and is getting bored in their marriage, but he has no idea. The next Sunday at church, Betty tells everyone they are fostering a new boy named David, and it's obvious that she doesn't really fit in with the other girls and is more of an outcast. Later that week, Candy and Alan attend their weekly volleyball match, and Candy starts flirting with Alan, which he doesn't make much of, but Candy is starting to miss being touched. That weekend, Alan goes out of town for work, and he leaves Betty with the 2 children, and David is starting to get on Betty's nerves and doesn't listen very well, and she feels stressed with Alan being gone. But he tells her he has to make money since she doesn't have a job. When Alan gets back home a few days later, Betty makes sure he knows she missed him and wants to be with him. Meanwhile, Candy is chatting with one of her friends, and she tells her that she is thinking about having an affair with someone to spice up her sex life, as Pat is boring. She just has to find the right guy that won't get attached. Betty throws a birthday party for David, but no one shows up, and David throws a tantrum and tells Betty that he hates her and doesn't want to live with her anymore. It ends with David leaving and going to another home, and Alan feels bad for Betty because she was trying so hard with him. Alan then goes to his volleyball game, and after they are done playing, Candy finds him in the parking lot and tells him she wants to have an affair with him. He doesn't say anything, so she kisses him on the cheek and leaves. The episode closes in present day with Candy telling the court that she grabbed the axe. Episode 3, Overkill. Candy and Alan meet to talk the logistics of their affair and how they will do it. They will meet at motels weekly and do it then, but if either of them starts to get attached, they need to end it because they both are happily married. Later that day, Betty calls Alan while he's at work and tells him that she is pregnant with another child, and this for some reason makes Alan want to have the affair with Candy even more. A few days later, they meet for the first time at a motel to eat and get it on. Afterwards, Candy tells Sherry what happened, and she loved it and wants to do it again. Time jump 2 months later, and Candy runs into Betty at their daughter's dance practice and chat it up. Candy even offers to have Betty's baby shower at her house. Alan doesn't know how to feel with Candy and Betty becoming closer friends. Betty thinks her marriage could use a little boost, so she tells Alan about a marriage encounter she wants to do with him. He agrees to do it. They go away for the weekend while Christina stays with the Montgomerys. The marriage encounter goes well, and it brings them closer together, and they head home. Jump 2 months later, and Candy goes through with her promise and holds Betty's baby shower at her house, which Sherry finds odd because she knows the truth. It's then that we can see that Candy is starting to get attached to Alan, which breaks their one rule. Betty even tells Candy she and Pat should go do the same marriage encounter that they did and how it really helped. The following day, Alan tells Candy that he likes where his marriage is going and thinks they should stop the hookups for now, which Candy doesn't agree with, but says okay. She was starting to fall for him. 3 months pass and Betty goes over to Candy's house and asks where she has been because she thought they were building a friendship together, but Candy just says she's been really busy. Betty asks if she wants to get lunch sometime, and Candy says sure, but then slams the door. The episode closes showing us the crime scene with the axe after Betty was murdered. Episode 4. Cover Girl. Candy is out one day, and Pat starts looking through old photos, and Sachin discovers a note that Alan wrote Candy about their affair, so now Pat knows the truth. We then cut to a courtroom scene where Pat is testifying his knowledge about the affair, and he tells the court she is not a violent person. Jump back to the night that Betty died, and the police show up at the Gore household to go over the crime scene where Justin Timberlake is a detective named Bog. The crime scene is gruesome, and Bog finds a bloody shoe print and also finds a sunglasses lens in the garage. The following morning, Alan arrives back in town and immediately goes home where he is interrogated by the police. Alan tells Bog that the last person to see Betty alive was Candy Gore. Pat and Candy take Christina back over to her house where Alan tells her the sad news that her mother is dead and Candy tries comforting them. Later that night, Alan decides to call Bog and he tells him he forgot to mention he had an affair with Candy Montgomery, the last person to see Betty alive. Alan tells him he doesn't think Candy could do this, but thought it would be good information to know. Betty was struck 41 times with an axe and Alan doesn't think there's any way Candy could do that to a human being. But she might know more information on what Betty was up to yesterday. Alan also says the affair had been over for 8 months, so there isn't any reason Candy would want Betty dead. The following morning, she is called in for questioning where she admits to the affair. They take pictures of her feet and shoes, and they see a cut on her toe which she says she got while skating. She claims her innocence. Throughout the next 2 days, she tries scrubbing and destroying any evidence that may be in her house, including her shoes and socks. On Monday, she goes to a local friend, Don, and asks him to be her lawyer. Don tells her he knows she is innocent and it had to be a big, strong man to commit this murder, picking up and swinging an axe 41 times. He says she'll be fine with him as her counsel. Everyone in town then attends Betty's memorial service and Alan is really going through it and feels so guilty for cheating on her, but still doesn't think Candy killed her. A few days later, Candy decides to go to Don and she tells him she did kill Betty, but it was self-defense and Betty was trying to kill her with an axe. Pat starts to wonder if Candy did it, so that night, he goes outside and tries swinging an axe 41 times. But he gets too tired and doesn't think Candy could have done it either. He goes back to bed thinking she is innocent. Episode 5. The Fight. Finale. The finale opens up with the police and the DA trying to reenact the murder scene, and they all firmly believe Candy Montgomery is their killer, and she's really the only suspect they have. They suggest they got into an argument about the affair and Candy found the axe in the garage and killed Betty in hopes of having Alan all to herself. They also believe there's no way she can claim self-defense. Meanwhile, Don has Candy start meeting with a psychologist to make sure her head is in a good mental state for trial, but Candy has vivid dreams and scares which may be the reason she lost it on Betty. The first day of court comes and it's a huge buzz around the small town. Candy pleads not guilty. The trial starts and Alan is the first person to take the stand to testify. He details the affair and how he doesn't believe Candy had any reason to murder Betty and Betty's father is in attendance, and he is upset that Alan is taking Candy's side. He has also moved on to a new woman already. Bog is the next one to take the stand and he testifies what he believes really happened that day and how self-defense is off the table, but Don completely makes him look a fool on stand. Don asks him if they ever tested the axe for Betty's fingerprints, and they say no, which is not proper police procedure. It should have been the first thing done after testing Candy's prints. After court that day, Don says he talked to Candy's psychologist, and he believes the overkill was done because something triggered Candy about her abuse when she was younger, and she blacked out and kept swinging as a result of it after being attacked by Betty. The following day in court, Candy takes the stand and tells the court what happened that fateful day. She went inside the Gore house and everything was fine until Betty asked her if she was sleeping with Alan, and Candy didn't want to lie, so she admitted to it, but said it was over. Betty then walked to the utility room and came back with an axe and told her to never talk to him again. Betty then sat the axe down and Candy apologized one last time, which pissed Betty off even more. Betty pushed her into the laundry room and grabbed the axe, swung at her, but only grazed Candy's foot. Candy was then able to wrestle the axe away, and she swung at Betty in fear for her life. Candy hit her and kept swinging in hopes of keeping Betty down. Something took over, and she swung over 30 times. The next thing she knew, Betty was dead. Candy showered real quick and then left the house. The court sees how bad this made Candy feel, and closing arguments come afterwards. The jury finds Candy not guilty, and she is free to go. Candy and Pat moved to Georgia for a fresh start, but got a divorce not long after, and she is still living her life as a free woman counseling in Georgia. And that is it for this one. If you want to check another version of the story, I have done Love and Death as well, and we'll link that video in the description below. Thanks for watching.